Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jimmy Quinn. I'm the National Security Correspondent for National Review. Today, we've got a great panel for you. I'm joined by Miles Yu and Therese Shaheen, and we'll be talking about House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's recent trip to Taiwan and what it means for the US-China relationship and what it means for Washington's support of Taiwan going forward. This is an event part of National Review Institute's continuing Peace Through Strength initiative. We've already hosted several virtual events and a half-day forum in Washington, D.C., which was broadcast live on C-SPAN. If you've missed these events, they are available on NRI's website. We have plans to host another event in D.C. on China this fall in person. So keep an eye out for that in your inbox for more details. Now on to our discussion. We've got a great panel. The panelists can talk about the evolution of US policy toward China and Taiwan over several administrations. So first off, we've got Miles Yu, who served in the Trump administration as the senior China policy advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Now he is director of the Hudson Institute's New China Center, a senior fellow at the 2049 Institute, and a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution. We also have Therese Shaheen, who was chairman of the American Institute of Taiwan, which is the State Department's Office of Taiwan Policy from 2002 to 2004. She's a contributor for National Review. We will be taking audience questions in the chat box. So please feel free to type out any questions and I'll monitor that as the discussion unfolds, and we'll start taking questions from there probably half an hour to 40 minutes in. So just go to the chat box. Why don't we just start our discussion here? Therese, we've had an eventful week with Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan and leaving, and this furious Chinese response unfolding. We've seen all sorts of missile tests, punitive measures imposed on Taiwan, even a cyber attack. So why don't we just start here? What do you make of all of it?
This is the usual suspects. It feels like the scene in Casablanca, where they're gambling and you're winning, sir. This is usual for China to do. The histrionics are usual when you do something that they don't like. They scream and yell and stomp their feet. But I believe that Nancy Pelosi's trip was part of the United States deterrence. The United States is a great power. Our job is deterrence. And as a mature power, we are supposed to have our deterrence be broad and strong. China, a less mature power, pushes us by buzzing our airplanes and pulling over fishing trawlers and buzzing, getting into other people's airspace and doing things that other powers like the United States, Japan, the Philippines can't respond to, won't respond to, because we are expected to act more maturely. So the United States and its allies and friends have to think about measured actions so we can put our foot on the pedal of measured deterrence. Nobody wants a war in the Pacific, nobody. It doesn't serve anyone. So how do we, at regular intervals, show our strength? Nancy Pelosi's trip is one of them. Now, she didn't have to go. I don't say she had to go, but because she decided to go, the country should be behind her. The Biden administration should be behind her. Miles has commented on this, that we are reaching a bipartisan consensus on China. It's different than the old China consensus. It is not strategic ambiguity. We're kidding ourselves if we are operating under strategic ambiguity, but it is not strategic clarity either. We have decided as a country that China is a threat. and Taiwan is important, and that we want the Pacific to be clear so that we have freedom of navigation, freedom of trade without China being the hegemon. Okay, so how do we do this? We need a policy of strategic coherence. And I think we're working towards that, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. So I think the Pelosi trip is part of this. China has been doing this for years. It did this constantly when I was chairman of AIT. We have to think about the Taiwanese when we do things like this. The Taiwanese don't always like this because they like to keep the temperature down. And so we have to kind of think of the Taiwanese when we do things like this, that because they have a lot of two-way trade, they have investment in China. And we have to be sympathetic to the fact that they like to keep the temperature down. That being said, they're not the only parties in the region. We're in the region, our treaty allies are in the region, and other interested parties are in the region. So these are things we have to do as a great power. So I am supportive of Nancy Pelosi's trip. She has been broadly supportive of human rights in China. And I believe it was a good thing. So I leave it to Miles to carry on from there.
All right, Miles.
Well, thank you very much, Jimmy, for hosting this. And thank you, Therese, for this very those very good remarks. So I'm a historian by training, so I always teach my students the essence of learning history is actually to understand the context rather than in addition to the basic facts. So let me just try to explain the context in which this Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan has caused such a big stir in global affairs. So first of all, Taiwan become an issue, become the focus of the international strategic affairs because of China. So US-Taiwan relationship has everything to do with the US-China relationship. And the US-China relationship has gone through revolutionary changes in the last 5-6 years. So when I say 5-6 years, I deliberately use that term because that imply the consistency and the continuity between the Republican administration and the Democratic administration. But it started with the Trump administration in 2016. So if you look at the Trump administration 50 years from now, you will notice that perhaps the biggest accomplishment in international affairs, in foreign policy, is the Trump administration's complete change of global dialogue on China. Specifically, it manifests in the following ways. Number one, we have abandoned this decades-long practice of playing the China card. China card basically is our utility to the United States. We normally use China as a conduit through which to reach other strategic goals, like defeat the Soviet Union, get us out of Vietnam, or solve the North Korean nuclear problems. But China itself is not the ultimate destination of our foreign policy focus. We changed that in 2016. We placed China at the top of our national security agenda. We designate China as the #1 existential threat to America and also to the very democratic system that existed and in the world and led by the United States. So we based this assessment obviously on the following 3 major categories. Number one, we completely reevaluated China's intent. That is, China's intent is not to just a rejuvenation of Chinese nation. China's intent is ultimately to replace the United States as the leader of a global system and replace it with the Chinese Communist Party dictated system. And so that's basically is what we mean by existential threat. Secondly, we also evaluate China's capabilities. China's capabilities have increased dramatically in the last 2 decades or so, and both economically, militarily, even in terms of international organizations' influence globally. So we feel that actually is a major threat to the world. Thirdly, we also evaluate China's opportunities. Opportunities the international community has afforded China in the last several decades. Unlike the old Soviet Union, China has gained many opportunities in a free market international trading system, like the WTO membership. China is fully integrated with the international system. That's what makes it very dangerous, far more dangerous than the old Soviet Union, which was completely separated from the free world. So those were basically the reason why we place China as a #1 national security threat. Now, specifically, we follow through with a whole series of specific measures. #1 is we abandon an engagement policy. Instead, we change it to one of strategic competition. Now, competition basically implies two very fundamental elements. One is, like any competition cannot have two winners. So China and the United States cannot both be winners. There's no such illusion and fantasy as a win-win, as Chinese communist government always try to bamboozle the United States leadership. So that's #1. #2, competition also implies all participants in competition must follow the same rules. So that's why it's a rules-based relationship since 2016. If you look at the even trade deal negotiation, if you talk about intellectual property rights, every single major initiative we deal with China follow this idea of strategic competition. Now, of course, we also apply the principle of reciprocity, and which means no special treatment with China. We fended off China lobby, former Wall Street influence, and we could formulate our China policy in a relatively more pure and rational environment. Now, what does this have anything to do with Taiwan, with the Pelosi trip? Well, the US-Taiwan relationship has also gone through revolutionary changes. There's major trends going on, which actually explains why the Pelosi trip is such a big deal. #1, in the last 5-6 years, U.S.-Taiwan relationship, the nature of the dialogue has changed from one of primarily focused on sovereignty issue to one of a epic struggle between freedom and tyranny. And we frame the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, U.S.-China relationship in those terms. That's why when we realize actually Taiwan is part of the democratic alliances in the world, we use those phrases and China freaks out. So they can't keep saying this is a sovereignty issue, this is still Taiwan is a part of China. So secondly, we also developed Taiwan-U.S. relationship more or less separately from the development and sort of evolution of the U.S.-China relationship. It's parallel. So it's not completely unrelated, but in a way, our engagement with Taiwan in the last 5-6 years, basically is just for the sake of U.S.-Taiwan relationship. You can see this from economic development, technological cooperation, even military cooperation, and assistance as well. Thirdly, I think this is very important because we no longer look at the Taiwan issue as the focal point of the security problem in Asia Pacific. We look at the Taiwan issue as the beginning of the chain of aggression by PRC. So this is a very important concept because we realize, we keep telling our friends and allies in Asia and Pacific, even to NATO members, that China is never going to stop at Taiwan. If China takes over Taiwan, next thing they're going to have a fight with Japan over Senkakus, over Vietnam, with India, and then entire South China Sea. You have to stop at the beginning. That's why this defense of Taiwan is so important for the United States. That idea of chain of aggression has been fully embraced by our friends and allies in Asia, Japan, for example, Australia. And recently, you see in a G7 and NATO summit, this has become a very important issue. So I will say the last one is really the issue of sort of the connection of Taiwan with what's going on in a much larger global geostrategic framework. That is the Ukraine situation and Taiwan situation. And in March of this year, just a few months ago, Secretary Pompeo and I went to Taiwan. This was weeks after the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Everywhere we went, it was Ukraine, 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 because Russia's invasion of Ukraine is motivated by the same impetus that China claimed it has for Taiwan. So this is why the Pelosi trip is such a big deal, because China wants to stick to the sovereignty issue rather than freedom versus tyranny. China wants to tie the US-Taiwan relationship with the US-China relationship. And China wants to basically isolate the incident instead of to prevent the United States and its allies to view this as China aggression. So Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan touch all the major aspects of that. China wants to sort of change this dialogue, change these changes. So that's why I think the intensity and the ferocity caused by this trip is so obvious and transparent. So I'm going to stop right here, and I would love to have more discussion on this.
So I'll turn it back to Therese here. You had a great column recently at National Review, kind of looking at an incident, I guess almost 2 decades ago now, where that reframing of US-China, US-Taiwan relations had not yet taken place. And Washington's relationship with Taipei was very much subordinated to the US-China relationship. Can you walk me through what things were like back then, given your government experience and what you saw at AIT?
Yes. First, I want to just say I agree with Miles about the chain of aggression. I think there's 2 vectors here for on Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. There's the chain of aggression, and then there's using Taiwan as a distraction for the weakness and challenges inside China, okay? Which is their problems with the failing in the real estate sector, the banking sector, education sector, unemployment, natural resources, all the internal challenges, okay? So there's 2 vectors, but I would not disagree with Miles in terms of chain of aggression. So I'd like to go back to that at some point. I would agree, okay? So let's go back to how this is, here we go again, a phrase by Ronald Reagan, okay? China has always demarched us every time we do, we side the wrong side, we use the wrong pronoun, we whatever we do, okay? They go into histrionics, okay? And one thing that was reset absolutely by the Trump administration was that they were going to stop reacting to Chinese histrionics, okay? Back when I was chairman and managing director of AIT, this was not the case, okay? True, the State Department knew that China was reactive and waited to see who was going to react to who, okay? How far could China go to see how state or the national security apparatus would react every time there was an incident, okay? When, in the beginning of the Bush administration acted very, very strongly when they accidentally brought down our EP3, okay? And reasserted that we would do anything to defend Taiwan. Bush himself said this, President Bush said this, Bush 43. And then as we got involved with the Iraq war, he kind of pulled back with this. China saw that we were distracted with the Iraq war and pushed until there was an embarrassing situation. Premier Wen Jiabao came to Washington and President Bush, said something that embarrassed the democratically elected president of Taiwan, which actually shocked even very, I would say, conservative-minded people, conservative vis-a-vis China-minded people at the State Department, people who would previously been very conservative vis-a-vis China, okay? But this is the pattern of China. They wait to see how we will react. And again, Miles has written about this and talked about this. They put us on the defensive and see how we will react, okay? And we play into this narrative, okay? We have the Trump administration reset this, and kudos to them. And kudos to the Biden administration for keeping the reset, okay? But it was really difficult to work in that environment, even to hold the ground, okay? In a administration that was, supportive of a two-party system in Taiwan. So this is an administration, George W. Bush, that was supportive of a new two-party system in Taiwan that had been a one-party system for 52 years. So it was very, very difficult. For your listeners that may not understand, the Kuomintang, who had fled communist China in 1949, they had been in power up until the time that the first DPP president, before the current DPP president, Tsai Ing-wen, was elected. And he had a very difficult time. He did not speak English. He did not have that advantage. And he was having a very difficult time maneuvering his relationship with the United States. And he had his own kind of January 6th event when he went to win re-election, when he was shot. And the Kuomintang, who didn't accept that they were going to be out of power again for a second term, disputed the election. It was very, very contentious in Taiwan. It was very contentious in the United States, who were very, very concerned that he would do things that would upset China. So we have a very different environment here for people that are entering the policy scene now.
So how does that play out domestically in Taiwan, Therese? What do you think about how the Taiwanese were thinking through Pelosi's expected visit? Was this worth the trouble for them? I mean, I think both you and Miles would agree that only Beijing is at fault for this overreaction and the missile tests and all of the heated rhetoric. But what was the visit and sort of the Chinese overreaction, which maybe they used the visit as an excuse for? Was it worth it for Taipei?
I think you get all kinds of reactions. Some people would say Taipei 101 was lit up. Welcome, Speaker Pelosi. You'd have people that would be, somewhat ambivalent, and you'd have people that would be opposed. Now, as many people know, younger people in Taiwan are much more pro-independence, or at least more pro-status quo. They want nothing to do with reunification with China. Certainly, they want to keep things as they are. I mean, 80% of the people living in Taiwan do not want to go be unified with China. That is for sure. Okay, but the younger you are, the more you'd be at least keeping the status quo, and you identify as being Taiwanese. Okay, that is for sure. Okay, and the older you get, you might have some relatives back in mainland China. You may not be thinking clearly on what happened with Hong Kong and what have you, but I still think that there are people that, even though they want to keep things as they are in Taiwan, would be nervous about the Pelosi visit. You can see how President Tsai Ing-wen is very circumspect about her language before the Nancy Pelosi visit and after, because she does not want trouble. They're the ones that are less than 100 nautical miles away from China. They're the ones that have all the investment in China. They're the ones that have the dependency on trade with China. They have their own internal problems in China. So they want to keep the temperature down. So even though the DPP, long before President Chen, the first DPP president, was elected, they had determined that they would confirm or affirm that Taiwan was an independent country. They still want to keep things low key and with the status quo. So they'll use the word status quo. The status quo hasn't changed. We're independent, and we have been independent.
Sure. And
that answers your question. I'm sorry.
Right. And Miles, what do you think? Do you think it was worth it for the Taiwanese? Was it worth it, for Washington? the Biden administration tried to basically convince the speaker not to go. What do you make of where the administration and the White House?
I think this is a big diplomatic triumph for America and for Taiwanese as well overall, because Nancy Pelosi's visit is not a fresh start. It is basically a continuation of a long string of high-profile American official and the European officials visit to China. I mean, during the Trump administration, we got the Secretary Azar, who's a cabinet secretary, visit to China. We send our Undersecretary of State, Keith Crack, to China. And we have signed all kinds of deals with their technology sector. So and it developed a very robust relationship. One reason why the Chinese try to use this to hype up all this tension is because they try to use this to intimidate the Biden administration, because they view Biden administration as weak, or as weaker at least. So if Nancy Pelosi's trip was pulled off, and then this will be a gigantic diplomatic victory for the Chinese. And so that's why their rhetoric is completely insane. I mean, the way they say it. So they vow to shoot down Pelosi's plane on its way to Taiwan. So the fact that the Biden administration was reported to have sort of tried to dissuade Pelosi from going is far less important than the fact that the Pelosi did go, and they went in such a great fashion. So I think that's put China in a very awkward situation. I can tell you this. I can predict this. After Pelosi, there will be some kind of a very auspicious competition to go to Taiwan. I mean, I believe the UK parliamentary members have vowed to go to Taiwan, and some German and French. You can see this is a very interesting, because Taiwan is such an important part of the global sort of political awareness that in the context of China's bullying everybody. So you can also expect some strong reaction from Japan. China fired a whole bunch of missiles today into Japan's EEZ zone without any particular procedure or notification. So the Japanese government is going to be very, very strongly reacting to this. So you might say the US, we haven't even heard our response yet to the Chinese military provocation. So I will say this is a win-win for the United States and its allies, and for Taiwan.
Okay, all right. And for the audience, for all of our listeners, I'm going to be taking the questions that populate the inbox periodically and just kind of throwing them into the conversation. So please feel free to submit a question down below on your screen. So why don't we go back to this concept of Taiwan as the first point in this chain of aggression, right? Therese, you wanted to return to that topic, whether we're speaking about Taiwan is the first point, like geographically in the Indo-Pacific, through which the PLA, if it invades, might break out and be able to project power into the Pacific, or as another potential crisis to immediately follow the Russian invasion of Ukraine. How should we be thinking through this in the broader geopolitical context right now, Therese?
I mean, Miles is correct. I mean, if the United States were to be perceived as weak, that we would not be perceived as coming to Taiwan's aid if China were to attempt to invade Taiwan, blockade Taiwan, et cetera, so forth. Then there would be the big creep. They would try the Senkaku Islands. They would move on Philippine territory. There would be the big creep. There's no question about it. There is absolutely no question about it. Now, I have written before that China, I do not believe China is in that position. I believe that they are going to scream and yell and tear their collars, but they are not going to move on Taiwan as long as we remain with a very firm and strong deterrence. But we have to do that. But if we don't do that, I absolutely agree, there will be the big creep. And that's why Japan a year ago said, move forward and said, look, we will go ahead and protect Taiwan as well. That was huge last June, when Taiwan came out and said, yeah, we're going to do what we can to protect Taiwan if we feel that our national security is threatened as well. So yes, agree with Miles 100% on that. I don't think that's what it's about. I believe this is a distraction because of internal weaknesses in China. They have a terrible, terrible natural resources problem. They have 21% of the population, 25% of the world's population, and 6% of the water. They have huge, huge problems with their banking system. They have 20% of their college graduates don't have any jobs. They are running into a terrible crisis. Xi Jinping announced several years ago the new Long March. He is preparing his citizenry for some pain, okay? And he is trying to get them to focus somewhere else. And that's what I believe.
So what should we be doing? Should we be doing anything to exploit the weaknesses that you've pointed out? And what should we be doing differently?
Well, I don't think so. I'll tell you
all of these new
again, Jimmy, I do not believe anybody wants war in the Pacific. And as China becomes obvious that China is caught in the middle income trap, okay? As it sees that China cannot break through, despite its military progress, in its military, okay? This will affect the rest of the world, okay? All will suffer because of this. All will suffer. So I do believe that you want to give China face in a way that doesn't, you don't want to embarrass them unnecessarily, okay? You want to show them that this is our domain. The Pacific is our domain, the domain of our allies, of freedom-loving people in the Pacific, okay? They are not the hegemon in the Pacific. However, you don't go out of your way to make them lose face. That doesn't work for anybody. That causes conflict. And I think that's true for anywhere in the world. I think that's the rule of thumb anywhere in the world. So where we can, I don't think China going down, I don't think anybody thinks China going down is good for anyone. Everybody knows they're too important of the economy. They're too important for the world GDP for them to go down. I wouldn't press the buttons on them becoming weaker and weaker. I wouldn't. If they need help, I would try to help them. But they, of course, they're too proud. They're too insecure. They're too image conscious. Xi Jinping is, in his own head. He's cut off, his advisors, his premiers that have been smarter. Li Keqiang, who's smarter than he is, who's warned about the informal economy, he doesn't listen to. Just like Wen Jiabao warned in 2007 that the Chinese economy is unstable, uncoordinated, and unsustainable. This has been an old warning long before Xi Jinping was president, that the Chinese economy wasn't going to get over the transom. And I think Xi knows it, even though he's more and more isolated. But I wouldn't bank on it. And so I agree with Miles that we must be careful, because this is a very dangerous game, especially when you have an isolated dictatorship. I mean, Miles may have more to say about this, but you can't count on it. So I would hand over to Miles on this.
Yeah, Miles, why don't we get you in on that? And also,
I think we have to realize that the danger for all the scenarios, insecurity, chaos, massive human displacement, all this possible scenario you can think of, is from China. So China is strong, China is weak, China is powerful, China is fragile. You can give them all kinds of descriptions about the regime. The bottom line is the regime has some kind of very aggressive agenda. Even a weaker giant can also be dangerous. I mean, President Richard Nixon, realized in 1967, when Citizen Nixon realized a isolated Chinese Communist Party is dangerous to global peace. So yes, we should embrace China, but we have to realize China is a source of all the instabilities. Listen, I agree with the Therese on the fragility and their dilemma. China faced two strategic predicaments here. One is when China does something against Taiwan or against anybody in Japan or India, it may well trigger a coalition of the willing. So other countries who have been sort of separately dealing with China, now they're going to all come together to have coalescing this event. That's what China's nightmare. So that's why China has consistently fighting against any formation of some kind of regional alliance. So even ASEAN, they don't want to deal with any joint action, joint statements even. So that's its predicament. And any action on Taiwan or in Japan or in Vietnam may well trigger that right now, because everybody is regarding China as the 800-pound elephant gorilla in the room. So that's the problem. Second problem is it's a domestic disenchantment. Right? When China launched the war, any kind of war is going to cause a dramatic disruption of people's normal life, on top of all the economic distress that Therese talked about earlier. So that's where the Chinese Communist government is really, really concerned, because any major action against a major country will have to involve in massive mobilization of human and material resources, even close down some major regions. Imagine you close down the Fujian coastal area. You close down the Zhejiang coastal area, which is directly outside of Taiwan. You have a massive protest. I'm not kidding, because even lock down one city in Shanghai and in other places, that spooked the Chinese Communist Party region. So regime stability, social stability is their ultimate concern. If you launch a major war, military action, you're going to have the highly likely you have some problem like that. Thirdly, I think China is watching what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Any bravado, pre-kinetic bravado, propaganda, doesn't mean anything if your military action turn out to be nothing but the demonstration of your paper tiger. So that's why the Chinese military, if you look at their shooting missiles, it's a very circumspect. They cannot guarantee 100% success. So now they're restricted to basically missile firing, long-range strike capabilities to basically have more of a psychological intimidation. So that's I think right now I'm very skeptical about China's sort of capability and their determination to launch a full-scale war. I think that's why much of this show is all about psychological warfare. I understand the importance of saving face for China, but China must save its own face first. Otherwise, you cannot expect us to save face. You cannot lock up like 1 million Uyghurs in Xinjiang and expect us to say nothing and save your face. So that's one of the legacies of the Trump administration, because we have to deal with China from the perspective of distrust and verify. And then we have deal with them with candor and candid talk about the fundamental nature of the two systems of governance in the United States and China.
So given this sort of tightrope that the Biden administration should be walking right now, and the need to confront Beijing while also not going too far and pushing them into a corner, immediately. There's been a lot of talk recently about abandoning strategic ambiguity. Therese, you mentioned this a bit earlier, saying that we've sort of moved on from strategic ambiguity, but we haven't gone to strategic clarity, where we would say that we're definitely coming to Taiwan's defense. what should we be doing anything differently on that front at this point? Should we be pursuing a different?
Well, I kind of quoted Miles earlier in my initial statement, because Miles has said, and I listened to him being interviewed in May, and there was the old consensus, was called the China consensus, that China was going to join the community of nations and blah, 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 blah. Now, the new consensus is a bipartisan consensus, which Miles has talked about in his other works and writings, which is bipartisan. It's fantastic. It was started with the Trump administration, and Miles is an author of that. Okay, so and the Biden administration is largely understood that this is what there's consensus around this, and they've largely gotten on board. And Nancy Pelosi, God bless her, has gone to Taiwan because of this. Okay, and I mean she's shown before, based on her support of the of the protesters in Tiananmen, that she's supported human rights in China and what have you. So I'm not saying that this is new for her. Okay, but what we need is a new policy. Okay, and at risk of repeating myself, I think it's something like strategic coherence. Okay, we have decided that China is a threat. We have decided that Taiwan is important. We have decided that we want that freedom of navigation in the Pacific, freedom of trade. Okay, this was a legacy that the United States inherited post World War II. Okay, and we don't want China to be the hegemon. Okay, this is a policy that should evolve into some sort of strategy that is a strategically coherent strategy. It has not totally evolved into a strategic coherent strategy. It doesn't have to move to strategic clarity. Okay, so that we have a commitment to, okay, if Taiwan is attacked, we're going to attack. It doesn't have to, but we have certainly moved away from strategic ambiguity. Now, we know that we're not in a strategically ambiguous situation anymore. Okay, too many statements have been made. When the Biden administration says, yes, we'll definitely defend Taiwan, when Nancy Pelosi goes over there, when Secretary Pompeo goes over there, when clearly we're not ambiguous about the way we feel about Taiwan anymore. It's too important. And frankly, China isn't ambiguous about Taiwan anymore. You know how long it would take to rebuild one of these semiconductor plants? They're not going to invade and destroy Taiwan. It'll take them 5 years to build those plants. They're not going to destroy the goose that laid the golden egg. Okay, so we have to come up with a new policy, something that works.
Okay, so
call it what you want, but you need to have the building blocks for it.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a very strong view about this strategic ambiguity. I mean, ambiguous on what? I think a strategic ambiguity is only ambiguous to a lot of policymakers in Washington, D.C. In the mind of the Chinese government, they have never have any ambiguity about whether America is going to involve or not. They always believe the U.S. will do. I mean, if you look at the sort of the history of U.S. involvement in similar situations, U.S. always gets involved. Even there was a tremendous amount of a pre-kinetic ambiguity. I'm giving the example of the Korean War, right? Even Dean Acheson, went to the press conference and said, "No, we're not going to be involved." In the end, we get involved. And another example is when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. We were very ambiguous before that, but in the end, we have to really get involved because ultimately, it's American prestige and American national interest at stake. So in this case, we have a much bigger stake in Taiwan. So that's why, in the minds of the Chinese high command, it was never ambiguous. The U.S. will get involved. I think strategic ambiguity is created in Washington, D.C. to provide a shield for our own strategic indolence. We don't want to say what we want to say, and we don't want to offend the Chinese. That's what it is. Well, this is basically this is a laziness. So strategic ambiguity comes in two things. One is strategic intention. Another one is a tactical operation. So I think strategic ambiguity never does exist. There's always strategic clarity on U.S. intention to defend Taiwan. However, there is a lot of operational tactical ambiguity, which is necessary. So that's where we are. So I think, this strategic ambiguity, it's only people in the policy circle, which I'm very familiar. I'm dealing with them every day. They confuse themselves. So that's the problem. So I do think, we have the Chinese have some strategic miscalculation about how U.S. make this decision on war and peace. They really misjudge. They think, they resort to traditional methods of elite capturing. In other words, that's why so-called strategic dialogue, right? Summit is so important to them. They want to talk to the president, very top. And once the president is bamboozled into some kind of ambiguous agreement, and then they work from that top down. So again, starting with Trump, that strategy approach completely failed. I think President Biden continued that, even though with less resolve. And I think he could have stopped Nancy Pelosi to go to Taiwan, but he didn't, right? So I think that's basically, you need to be more straightforward to show the resolve, because Taiwan is far too important. By the way, this is not Taiwan's defense is not meaningful to the United States in terms of rhetoric, value, and principle. Taiwan is no longer a passive player in global economic, trade, and military affairs. Taiwan's Teresa mentioned all about TSMC. I mean, they provide about 90% of global's chip supply. I mean, Taiwan is also, I believe, is the number 9 trading partner of the United States. It's very important. Taiwan also, it's a pretty vibrant democracy and freedom. And I think, I study Taiwan, I went there as an election observer. I think their election system is much even better than ours. I mean, so in a way, it's much more like a modernized. And so I think, so I'm a big fan of Taiwan, not only from emotional point of view, but from a real politics, from America's own economic, cultural, and political interest point of view, and we need a different time. That's why when Japanese politicians, Australian politicians say, to defend Taiwan is to defend Japan. I mean, it makes perfect sense, and that's what I mean by sort of chain reaction on the issue of Taiwan.
So we're probably going to see more visits from other countries, parliament members to Taiwan in the coming months after Pelosi. I think you just predicted it. I think Lithuania's foreign minister hinted at something like that. Maybe the UK sends some people. As for the Biden administration, what happens now? Are they going to continue forging forward with this new bipartisan consensus on Taiwan, or are they going to try to cool tensions a bit by retrenching and not moving forward as swiftly with the sort of agenda that the Trump administration put in place in terms of diplomatic contacts between U.S. diplomats and their Taiwanese counterparts? What's going to happen now?
I think you're gonna see that they're gonna see with in real time, even though President Biden has been in Washington forever, he's gonna see in real time that the Chinese, and close up, the Chinese will be hysterical as they always are, and then things will get back somewhat back to normal. And so he'll see that it was for naught. Besides, the election is coming up, and it'll be who can beat their breasts harder on China. And so he's going to have to step up to the plate.
Yeah.
But I would like to get back to this point. I think Miles said it best. We need to start backing off this, removing strategic ambiguity from our lexicon. It's confusing. It might work in some military circles on, in military jargon and military war games, but it doesn't work as an overall policy. Okay. We need to remove it from the overall lexicon. But I think the Biden administration will see that this is a bunch of hooey. Okay, I don't believe that they'll come begging on bended knee. If they do, whatever. If they do, he's lost all sense. Okay, but I just don't. I think he'll see it too close up.
Yeah. I think one of the issues that define the success or failure of any particular administration in the United States is whether that administration has the capability to prioritize this agenda. And in the Trump administration, I think there is an issue of first principles. In other words, we basically go after the most important things, and there's a priority. I mean, there's national security threat against the United States every day, dozens of them, right? But then you have to create sort of a ladder. You have to create the top priority. I think in the Biden administration, there are conflicting agenda competing for the top. There's a climate change people. There's the economic people. There is China agenda. There is a European agenda. There is a friend and alliance agenda. So I think in this case, I don't think the Biden administration has really completely sort of sorted out clearly. They did not sort of object to our China as a #1 national security threat. This narrative, but they also keep saying climate change is the #1 leading concern of the nation. I mean, there is a philosophical issue. There's also a practical issue. There is a geopolitical realization. There's also the long-term transitional issue facing the nation. So I think that the Biden administration is less clear on the strategic priority, is less focused than the previous administration. But overall, there is, as I say, they cannot escape the national consensus that the Congress play an unprecedented role in framing the U.S.-China policy. There is a very significant piece of legislation in the Senate about Taiwan that's going on. It's going to revise and enhance 1979 Taiwan Relations Act in languages that were sort of unprecedented. It's going to be very, very, we're going to talk about treating Taiwan as a non-NATO ally. So that's pretty strong language. You've passed it. It's going to be like, I'll go to have a moment of kumbaya myself.
Yeah, Miles, I would just add what's interesting about that is the bill was supposed to be voted on by the Senate today. But then there's a report that the White House intervened. It told Democratic lawmakers that it wanted to work on the language. And now I believe the report says the vote will be in September. That's according to Bloomberg. So the administration is intervening here and saying we need to take our foot off the gas. What sort of signal is that sending right now?
Well, one of the most important aspects of the recent development in how the U.S. government functions is that we try to get rid of what I call the anger management government style. In other words, we formulate our policy not based upon what's best for the national interests of this country, but based upon how mad China might get us, might be toward us. So we make any major policy based on how China might react to this. This is total nonsense. That's the problem. So this is a very specific demonstration. We got rid of that. So one of the very specific example was that China keeps sending us, say, hey, there's a red line, Taiwan Strait, no more warship passages over there. That's the red line. So during the Trump administration, we started from beginning. We sent warships passing the Taiwan Strait. Not once, not twice. I think close to like 60 times, 60. We basically normalized Taiwan Strait, make it the international waterway. Once we did that, and China moved this red line, they don't talk about it. So we can do it almost on a routine basis. And once we did that, our friends and allies, they're sending warships over there. So this is basically the danger of the Chinese has a target, working on the United States. They understand our bureaucratic sort of fear. So this country, much of the U.S. policy toward Taiwan, toward China, is run by bureaucrats. Bureaucrats whose primary concern is how to do things right. They're really concerned about how to do the right thing. So that's why we try to change the policy. We force upon them. They will come around and doing the right thing as well as doing things right. So I think the idea that the White House would tell the Congress, tone down the language, and it's preposterous because in the end, if you look at the trajectory, the Congress passed in recent years, passed all China-related bills with overwhelming majority. In most cases, actually, it's unanimous. So if Congress insists on its own will and pass all the right bills, and even if the ones vetoed, the president vetoed, then it could be override. So that's one of the reasons I think we should really stop this nonsense and anger management style. China always raises the anger level at the maximum, and then they will see how the U.S. will react. In most cases, we will cave. That's very unfortunate.
Sure.
I have to chime in here, Jimmy. I mean,
yeah, we've got 2 minutes left. How much do you think the Chinese are going to escalate in the next couple of days? The live fire exercises are continuing, I think, until Sunday. What are you expecting here?
Jimmy, I have to just say, I agree with Miles 100%. This is all about anger management. In the last year, they have said, we're gonna cross a red line 3 different times. 3 different times. And every time we cross the red line, nothing has happened. Last Thursday, a week ago today, Xi Jinping said to Joe Biden, he loves to use these aphorisms, and he mixes his metaphors and his proverbs and what have you. He said, he who lives by fire will perish by fire. Mixing, he will play with fire, will get burned. And then the Proverbs, according to Saint Matthew, he lives by the sword, will die by the sword. And he loves to use, and he's going to put him in Xi Jinping thought, right, Miles? Anyway, he loves this sort of anger. Miles says is the anger management style. Okay, he loves to do this. Now, think about this: what Miles said about how these people in Fujian province would get angry. Think about this: we've had the one-child policy for all these years. All these one children are going to be involved in amphibious invasions, and we know how deadly these amphibious invasions are. And so does the PLA and its leadership. Okay, so I don't believe that this escalation will get out of control. It will not lead to real danger to Taiwan.
Yeah, I agree with 100%. And it's a Chinese language is my native tongue, so I know all the Chinese phrases over there. Most of the phrases and warnings Chinese government use is basically from some Chinese proverbs of ostentatious profundity. It means nothing. Only when translated in English, it sounds pretty ominous. They've been saying the same kind of hackneyed phrases for decades. So it doesn't mean anything. I don't think you already see the sort of de-escalation of the promised ball of fire. It's very quick. I think I can guarantee. I can always predict it. All this military fanfare, all this outbursts will basically stop even before Sunday.
All right. Well, let's see. We're at time now. I'm so sorry, but got to conclude the conversation. We could keep going for hours and hours, I'm sure. But thank you both so much for taking the time and offering your expertise and the experiences that you gained in government. National Review Institute just wanted me to remind everyone here that the final deadline for the National Review Institute Caribbean cruise is quickly approaching. The deadline is Monday. I'll be there. A number of other National Review writers will be there. It's going to be in November, from November 12th to 19th. There's a link in the chat box to register, or you can go to NRI's website. Thank you both again, and thank you to our wonderful audience for all the questions, and we'll see you at future virtual and in-person events. Thank you.
Thank you.